Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. I hope the week's gone well. I hope we might see you this evening at the Intercontinental Nairobi from about 5 o'clock or just before. We're going to have our first Mindspeak session of the year with Albert Mugo and his team from Kenyan. And it's a hot subject, power. All the power was out in Nairobi. But of course, they're not the power, they're the power generator. I'm looking forward to this. Intercontinental from 5. If you haven't been to a Mindspeak session before and you want to get a flavour of what I'm talking about, have a look at what is Mindspeak on Rich Wrap-Ups. The link is there. Or even have a look at a little teaser I did earlier in the week with Albert when I went to visit his office, and then it started raining and it took me like 3 hours to come 1 kilometre. And this is the problem with the rains, which are entirely unseasonal, and part of why I'm bullish about Kenya, because meteorology has such a key role to play. And whilst everyone else is being scorched by El Nino, Kenya has hit a little sweet spot. So we're there from 5, looking forward to it. Lots of interesting people in the audience. Mindspeak is a great place to network. Please, you're most welcome. Macro thoughts. Brent, the global benchmark, has surged more than 11% in the past 2 days after settling at $27.88 a barrel on Wednesday, the lowest close since November 2003. The contract gained as much as $1.85 to $31.10 on Friday. Prices slid 35% last year. I think it's a massive dead cat bounce, but dead cat bounces when you've had such dramatic moves can be really big. So it could do another 10%, but let's keep an eye on it. Bloomberg Business tweeted Brent back above $30. Have a look at their chart as well. Home thoughts. It is not down on any map. True places never are. And you know where that's from? Herman Melville, Moby Dick. Fantastic book. We're a crowd, a swarm. We think in groups, travel in armies. Armies carry the gene for self-destruction. One bomb is never enough. The blur of technology. This is where the oracles plot their wars, because now comes the introversion. Father Teilhard knew this, the omega point, a leap out of our biology. Ask yourself this question: do we have to be human forever? Consciousness is exhausted, back now to inorganic matter. This is what we want. We want to be stones in a field. Don Delillo. The less there was to see, the harder he looked, the more he saw. True life is not reducible to words spoken or written, not by anyone, ever. The true life takes place when we're alone, thinking, feeling, lost in memory, dreamingly self-aware, the sub-microscopic moments. Now, there was this big story about these fossils which have been unearthed at Nataruk near Kenya's Lake Turkana. The battered bones provide conclusive evidence of something that must have been an intergroup conflict. I'll put up that photograph, and that took me back to my visit to Olegasai, which is a long way away from Lake Turkana, but where there are all these stone axes. According to the Smithsonian, early humans lived in the Olegasai region in what is now southern Kenya between 1.2 million and 490,000 years ago. I can't help feeling if those instruments, those stone hand axes, were put to this kind of use that they found in Nataruk. Olegasai is a sedimentary basin located in southern Kenya in the eastern African Rift Valley. Has been excavated for many years and contains many artifacts that have accumulated over a long period. Here we will look at finds unearthed in this region between 1.2 million and 490,000 years ago. Faunal remains, the fossil bones of animals, tell us which animal species lived in the Olegasai area, while the sediments show the changes that occurred in the environment, such as the expansion or drying up of a lake, the presence of rivers, and the eruption of volcanoes. Oligocy is unusual because of the large number of hand axes found there, along with other bifacial tools flaked on two sides to create an edge. Archaeologists used to assume that excavated sites provide examples of campsites or other living spaces typical of modern human hunter-gatherers. It's a pretty remarkable find in Turkana, sort of close to what I saw there in Oligocy. Political reflections. Yusuf Garad, Lido Beach, Mogadishu, came under a terrorist attack last night. Huge explosions and heavy gunfire heard. And I concluded by saying the insurgency tail risk is wagging big again. I wrote about it in September 2014 when I said last year Ben Bernanke was asked why people hold gold. And he said as protection against what we call tail risks, really, really bad outcomes. And I said then the insurgency tail risk remains, and how it plays out will have important consequence for ourselves and the entire Africa Rising narrative, and I stand by that. Craig Chirinda says, quotes Soros, ISIS and Al-Qaeda found the Achilles heel of Western civilization, fear of death. This fear trumps the need for rational leadership. Canadian Prime Minister, thanks to George Soros for sharing your insights on the global economic outlook and climate change. This is Justin Trudeau. And then he also met with John Kerry, an honour to meet the distinguished John Kerry on the sidelines of Davos 2016. Matt Lee tweeted, Secretary Kerry, Iran's supreme leader went to the extraordinary length of actually apologizing yesterday for the sacking of the Saudi embassy. Secretary Kerry says Iran's supreme leader apology is very significant, and I hope people will recognize that in today's context. That's a huge step. I concluded, note the change of tone. Ian Bremer, if Africans migrated to the EU at the rate Mexicans have migrated to the US since 1970, by 2050, 25% of the EU would be African-born. Sheryl Sandberg, men still run the world, and I'm not sure it's going that well. Seymour Hersh, when he was writing about the Bin Laden raid, old sick man who is going to be murdered. Chinese Vice President vows to look after stock market investors at the World Economic Forum. George Soros says he expects a hard landing for China's economy. As I said in July last year, the stock market crash represents probably the biggest political risk to the neo-totalitarian Xi Jinping. And then in August 2015, I quoted a senior IMF official who said it's totally premature to speak of a crisis in China. And I said, in my experience, when policymakers make those kinds of pronouncements, it is exactly because there is a crisis. Let's move on. Jamie McGeever, euro and bond yields tumble, stocks jump as Draghi gives strong hint of more easing in March. The euro sold off. It's now trading at 108.25. It got below 108. Dollar index 99.36 last time I checked. Dollar yen 118.09. And consider that it hit a one-year high of 115.97 earlier this week. I'm still bullish. I think you buy it on these dips. Swiss franc 10090. Pound, big old bounce from below 141 yesterday. We're now at 142.32. Aussie, I think that's back above 70.7016. So you can see what a strong rally we've had in these commodity currencies, driven by the oil move, I think. India rupee 67.725, South Korean won 1200.63, Rial now at 415.57. 600,000 jobs were shed in December. Egyptian pound 782.98 and the rand 1660.15. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. George Soros is saying he doesn't expect another move out of the Fed now. That would be a dramatic development if we see that play out. I'm not so sure it's correct. Dollar Canada, let me put up a 5-day chart to look at the rebound in the Canadian. Big reversal day yesterday, as I said, in commodity currencies. I'm still bearish the dollar. the Canadian dollar. Dollar yen now 118.08. I think you buy the dip somewhere here between 118 and 119 and leave some room in case we see a pop higher towards the 120 level. Commodity markets, gold around the, where are we now, 1096 level. Some of the froth, the risk froth being taken off. So it's the geopolitical premium is being shaved off, so you're seeing it slow down a bit. I'll put a longer term chart of Brent oil for you to have a look at as well. Bank of Russia chief axes Davos trip as ruble speculators pounce. Bank of Russia's press service gave no reason for Governor Elvira Nabulina's decision not to travel to Davos, a day that the ruble declined as much as 5.3% to 85.999 per dollar. It's sensible not to stand in the way of a freight train. When you have oil prices under pressure, it makes sense not to stand in the way. Oil prices will probably trade down to the low 20s and the ruble will follow. As I said last year, Vladimir, the geopolitical grand master, did not see the oil warfare specialist Barack Obama coming. And on the 5th of October 2015, when I was talking about the Syrian intervention, about how Vladimir handled it very effectively, I said President Obama is now probably considering how he can wrestle the oil price to $20. That's a fact. There's been a continued show of military power by the Russians, and they've now apparently parked some big naval ships in the Mediterranean. And I'll put up a photograph of one at sunset. Let's move on to sub-Saharan Africa. Fearing genocide, ex-Burundi presidents plead for UN troops. Two former Burundi presidents pleaded for the United Nations Security Council on Thursday to back the deployment of international troops to the African state gripped by political violence because it runs the risk of becoming another Rwanda. Diplomats of the 15-member council arrived in Burundi's capital Bujumbura on Thursday evening for its second visit to the state in less than a year. They are due to meet President Pierre Nkurunziza on Friday. There were several grenade explosions on Thursday in Bujumbura. Hundreds of pro-government protesters lined the road from the airport to the UN envoy's hotel, welcoming them with drumming and dancing and signs with messages such as "Burundi is sovereign, stop interfering in Burundi home affairs." Let me put up a photograph that was tweeted. Beautiful Burundi, Bujumbura, really nice view out there, and indeed it looked a beautiful and idyllic view. Pentagon expands in Africa, says Africa Confidential. The US Africa Command is improving its logistics south of the Sahara because it believes insurgent threats are growing. Africa is home to growing threats and opportunities, says the United States Africa Command, General David M. Rodriguez. The US, and I've spoken about this before, has a decisive hard power advantage over the African continent and can tilt the continent with that hard power. I said, taking a broader sweep, it's clear that the United States and US Africa Command has carved out a much more forward position in the African continent. In some respects, Obama's pivot to Asia detours through Africa. Now, I was saying China has made a parabolic advance across the continent, and one of the desired side effects of staunching the Al-Qaeda advance is that it also counters the Chinese advance via the insertion of US hard power. And then, this was 2013, I was saying the US cannot challenge China's extreme dollar diplomacy now being tapered, but it can insert hard power with which it can tilt the African pitch. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is an advisor to the US president, said this, and it's tangential, but I still think it's very powerful. The three grand imperatives of imperial geostrategy are to prevent collusion and maintain security dependence among the vassals, to keep tributaries pliant and protected, and to keep the barbarians from coming together. I also said a sine qua non of President Obama's pivot to Asia is US-NATO power projection over the Indian Ocean. Professor Felipe Fernandez Amesto explains why the precocity of the Indian Ocean as a zone of long-range navigation and cultural exchange is one of the glaring facts of history made possible by the reversible escalator of the monsoon. Let me put up a photograph of the setting sun in Lamu, which is of course on the Indian Ocean. Another photograph of Ali the navigator, who navigated us to Oceania Island, which is also in the Indian Ocean. And then take you to a tweet I did 602 days ago when I was in Maputo. And I took a photograph of the IMF, government of Mozambique poster for the conference I was attending. And I'll put that photo up. And I said then, Africa rising, but no longer. In the rising tide floats all boats way it was in 2012 and 2013. Africa Confidential says, after the rising, now reform and realism. Bankers' bets based on glossy analytical reports about Africa's lion economies and a doubling of its GDP by 2025 were discreetly torn up last year. In their place are downbeat prognoses about Africa's position in a much harsher global economic and political climate. Now, for the irrepressible optimist, this year's hard times will concentrate minds. Talking about Nigeria, business people and oppositionists chant similar mantras about restructuring in South Africa and Angola, more interest in the dirigist model of economic restructuring developed by Ethiopia, Morocco and Rwanda, more market-led developments in Kenya. World Bank economists reckon that the downward trajectory started in 2014, when average GDP growth in Africa fell to 4.6%. Latest report notes a further slowing down to 3.4% for this year, a modicum of optimism with a forecast rise to 4.2% the following year. 5 developments fuel the gloomier outlook for Africa. Firstly, China's economic rebalancing, slowdown. By some measures, China is already the world's biggest economy, and for Africa it certainly is the most influential one by dint of the more than $200 billion annual trade account with the continent's 55 economies, and you know I'm bearish about China. Secondly, the commodity price crash cannot all be blamed on China, and it is not blighted all Africa's exports. For example, export earnings from cocoa, coffee and tea look set to hold up in both the increasingly lucrative specialist markets and in the traditional bulk purchase markets. That's one of the reasons I was talking about the El Nino effect, sweet spot. Then you've got that good price performance in soft commodities on which Kenya is also dependent. In other areas, the commodity news is undeniably grim. The millions of extra barrels of oil on the international market seem destined to push the prices down further. Mining companies are laying off workers across Africa, at least 50,000 people in South Africa and tens of thousands in Congo, Kinshasa and Zambia. Thirdly, the Western-dominated financial sector will impose tougher terms on African borrowers. We've already seen that. Raising finance for big capital projects will get harder still. With a stronger dollar and higher domestic interest rates, more cautious financiers are returning to the US markets. Not only will African countries have to pay higher interest rates on fresh sovereign bond issues, the cost of servicing existing debts are likely to rise sharply. Already the vulture funds of Wall Street are eagerly surveying the market for bargains. Fourthly, the political and security climate is scaring off Africa's many short-term investors and fair weather friends. Fifthly, and this is really important, the extreme weather, longer droughts, heavier flooding associated with climate change is doing increasingly serious damage to agriculture in Africa, as well as worsening social conditions more generally. And I think that's a fair point. Then further on saying that, the IMF reckons that oil producers such as Angola and Nigeria will have to make sharp fiscal adjustments. We'll see growth levels sharply down. Predicts growth of more than 6% for several countries: Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Mozambique, Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, Congo, Kinshasa and Chad. That's where the sweet spot is. India to increase oil imports from Africa. They already import a significant amount of oil. They're saying as a matter of policy, present Indian government is keen to move towards a geographically diversified energy basket. Compound annual growth rate of Indian primary energy consumption in the last 15 years has been about 7.3%. A revolution from below is redefining what it means to be middle class. This is The Economist. This growing class of consumers is attracting a herd of private equity firms and multinational consumer goods companies to cash in on what McKinsey called Africa's single largest business opportunity. This seems fanciful, even though the region's economy has expanded at an average pace of close to 5% over the past 15 years. A somewhat more sober assessment by South Africa's Standard Bank that is based on the spending power and consumer habits of families, whether they have a television for instance, reckons that there are just 15 million middle-class people in 11 of sub-Saharan Africa's biggest economies. Almost a third of these live in Nigeria, hardly any in Ethiopia. Small as this class may be, it is already having outsized effects in driving innovation. A carer for a woman who died of Ebola in Sierra Leone has now been infected with the virus, so those calls that Ebola was defeated were a little bit early. South Africa's President Zuma criticized for Davos panel no-show. Probably didn't fancy meeting all these folks who are getting hammered on their end. Zuma's office denied he was a no-show at the discussion, which featured Ethiopian Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn and Rwandan President Paul Kagame, saying it had told Davos organizers last week of a scheduling change. The South African all-share is down 8.7% and at a 24-month closing low, down 8.7% in this year, January. Dollar rand, let me put up a 6-month chart. I'm still bearish. That's until President Zuma exits. Egyptian pound, 783. Egyptian EGX 30 down 18.45% in 2016 and at a 28-month closing low. Nigeria plans to borrow up to $5 billion from multiple sources, including the Eurobond market. Last week, of course, the Naira hit a foreign exchange scarcity, fell to a record low of 305 to the dollar on the parallel market. Nigerian non-deliverable currency forwards indicate markets expect the Naira exchange rate at 284 to the dollar in 12 months' time. The Nigerian all-share is minus 17.3% this year, but has rebounded 5.477% over just two of the last two sessions. Ghana Stock Exchange bucking the trend, up 0.1% year to date. The Central Bank of Kenya tells the Imperial Bank owners to deposit 10 billion shillings as a precondition for opening dialogue on their pledge for reopening the lender. We are very keen to real genuine proposals to reopen the bank. There is an account here in the CBK. If you are serious, put the money there, then we can discuss, he said at a press briefing. He has said he's been waiting on the shareholders, who he referred to as people with means, to honour their pledge made soon after the closure of the bank in October. The conundrum is this: the board is either incompetent or complicit. Imperial Bank owner Poppet is second left other directors at a press briefing by shareholders at the collapsed bank on January the 12th, 2016. Patrick Njoroge, the central bank governor, said the current account deficit was forecast to fall to 8.5% of GDP in 2015 from 10.4% the year before, and narrow further in 2016. I wrote about this on the 11th of January when I said there is a massive trend change occurring in front of our eyes in what was a previously intractable problem, the perennial current account deficits. This is an important point to note. Our import bills, fuel and associated product are the single biggest expense item, and these expenses have created. Interesting article in The Economist, Kenyan politics, rifts in the rift. Talking about driving west out of Nairobi, you quickly realize how astonishing the topography around the Kenyan capital is. After an hour or so crawling in traffic past tea fields and farmers selling sheepskins and fresh vegetables, motorists suddenly find themselves on an escarpment from which the land simply drops away. On the horizon, mist clings to the top of Mount Longonot, a dormant volcano. Before it, a patchwork of tiny green farms stretches across the valley floor like a carpet. This is the central part of the Rift Valley, a vast depression that stretches thousands of miles. For the first decade and a half after independence in 1964, the Kikuyu, led by Jomo Kenyatta, were on top. Then under President Daniel Arap Moi, the Kalenjin started to pull a lot of the shots. In 2002, Moi was succeeded by Kibaki, who reasserted Kikuyu power. But this was challenged at the polls in late 2007 by an alliance led by Raila Odinga. And talking about how these elections have gone on, most Kenyan analysts think Messrs. Kenyatta and Ruto could easily win again if they stick together. I think that's a fact. But the question is, will the ICC breach that combination? I like the photograph that The Economist put out. Beware the cliff edge. The Kenya shilling, Teflon, 102.35. Nairobi all-share fell 1.3% yesterday. It's down 5.96% year to date. NSE 20 fell 0.96% yesterday, down 6.95% year to date, and at a 43-month closing low. Ever-ready East Africa finally reported full-year earnings per share of 2 shillings and 80 cents versus a loss last time of 0.85. The big turnaround. Revenue was down 6.94%. Operating profit was down 78.34%, but what they did is they revalued their Nakuru property, and that is what essentially caused that EPS rebound. Once again, thank you for stopping by. Hope to see you this evening at 5.